Hey, what's up guys? Welcome to part 2 of the Tic Tac Toe tutorial series. In this video we're going to complete 2 of the 4 functions that we need to complete this game. Before we get started, please make sure to like, subscribe, and leave me a comment. I really would appreciate it. Alright, let's get right into it. Let's open up the file that we created in the last video. And first things first, here where it says image, I actually messed up. It's supposed to say file. So go ahead and change that. And let's get started with this play function here. This play function is going to contain the buttons that we need for this game. We need a total of 9 buttons. So let's create those. The first one, we're going to call it button 1. And let's call on the button class. The first parameter is going to be the name of this window, which is root. We named it root at the beginning of the project here. Next, we're going to set a height to this button. We want it to have a height of 9, and we also want to set a width to it. Let's set a width of 19. And we also want this button to have a particular border around it. I'm going to go with the ridge style. There's other styles. This is a picture of all the other styles. I'm going to go with this ridge style here. And this is with a border width of 8, so we can actually set how thick we want this border to be. I'm going to go with the lowest setting. So to do that, we just have to type in border width, and I'm going to go with 0.5. And also want this button to have a color to it. So I'm going to type in background, and I can choose what color I want. I usually go to this website here. It's called w3schools.com, and you can actually choose whatever color you want from here, and you can choose a different percentage or a different shade of that particular color that you clicked on. I'm gonna go with this green here, and I'm gonna go with this particular shade of green. So I'm just gonna copy and paste this hexadecimal number here, and I'm gonna place that number in here. So let's create some quotes first and then copy and paste that. Next, we're going to create a text variable. We actually already created up here. Well, with the text variable, you have to create it inside the button here, but then you actually declare it up here as well. And when you declare it up here, you actually get to choose what kind of text variable this is. This is a string var text variable, so it's going to be able to hold strings. And this is where we actually create the text variable. So here we're going to say btn1. So this text variable is btn1. It's associated with button 1. Now when the user actually clicks on this button, we want something to happen. To do that, we have to type in command equals lambda. And what this is going to do is it's going to allow us to call on a function. For this particular button, and actually for all the buttons, we want to call on the press function that we're going to create in a moment. So let's call on that function, and inside here we want to return something over to the press function. The first thing we want to return is what number button this is. This is button 1, so we're going to return a number 1, and we're going to grab it in the press function through this num here. The next thing we want to send over is the location of this button. Now we actually haven't placed this button on the window yet, but this button is going to go on row 0, column 0. And we're going to grab those numbers on the press function as well. So we're going to say RC. R is short for row, and column, or C is short for column. Now we actually want to place this button on the window. To do that, just type in the name of the button and grid. So we're going to use the grid method of Tkinter, and in here we're going to type in where we want this button to be. For this one, we're going to want it in row 0, column 0. Alright, now for the rest of the buttons, I'm not going to actually type them up here because it's going to take way too long and it's going to make this video way too long. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy the rest of the buttons. I'll leave a link in the description to the code so you can just copy and paste it onto your project. Okay, so I just copy and pasted the rest of the buttons. Now, everything is pretty much the same except for button 1, 2, and 3 have the same background color. And you could actually, if you noticed, for the other buttons I used BG, and that's short for background. So you could either type in background or BG. It actually does the same thing. So it's whatever you want to go with. But if you notice, button 1, 2, and 3, they have the same color. So I chose the same color for button 1, 2, and 3. And button 4, 5, and 6 have a different shade of that green. So I went with this hexadecimal color here. And that color is, let me show it to you. So what I did was, this is the color that I used for button 1, 2, and 3. And then for 4, 5, and 6, I moved over 1. And then I went with the one below that one. So I just skipped 1. So this is the color that I used for 4, 5, and 6. And then for 7, 8, and 9, I did the same thing. So I went with this here. So as you can see, this is the color here. Now I encourage you guys to use a different color. Make the purple version of it or something, you know, just add your own flavor to this project. All right, and the reason that I actually copy and pasted all the buttons is because it really is just repeat code. We're just creating more buttons. Basically, we did the exact same thing, except for, you know, changing the background color to the other buttons. But what I really want to concentrate on is this grid method here. So you notice I placed button 1 in row 0, column 0, and I placed button 2 in row 0, column 1. And for each one of the buttons, they are placed in a different number. So you might be wondering, why is this button on row 1, this one in column 0? And yeah, so I'm actually going to show you that. And I'm going to go over to Paint. And this is how the grid works. So basically you have rows. Rows are going horizontally. So this is row 0, this is row 1, and this is row 2. And columns are coming down vertically. So this is column 0, column 1, and column 2. Now if we wanted to place a button in, if we wanted to create this button here, this would be button 1, right? So this is, pretend this is our Tic Tac Toe game. So this is button 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Now if we wanted to create button 1, what row and what column are we going to place it in? Well, you start with what row you want it to be in. The first button is always going to be at the very beginning. So this one's going to be, button 1 is going to be in row 0, column 0. What about button number 2? For button number 2, it's in the same row, so it's going to be row 0, but it's in column 1, so it would be row 0, column 1. Now for button number 3, this one would be located in row 0, column 2. Button number 4 is in row 1, column 0. And button number 5 is in row 1, column 1. Button number 6 is in row 1, column 2. And button number 7 is in row 2, column 0. Button number 8 is in row 2, column 1. And button number 9 is in row 2, column 2. That's how the grid works. It always starts at 0. And this is basically the blueprint for our tic-tac-toe game. So we're going to follow these. Now, if you wanted to add more buttons over to this side, then you would just continue on. This would be on row 0, column 3, and so on and so forth. So this is actually the blueprint for our game. So if you noticed on the grid method here, I chose for button 1, I chose row 0, column 0. Button 2, it's right next to it, but it's in the same row. So it's still in row 0, but one over. And yeah, so you guys get the idea. All right, that's going to be it for the play function. I actually want to show you guys how it looks like. So let's comment these out, or it'll give us an error because we haven't completed them yet. and let's just call on this play function. Oh, and it's telling me that I have an error, so that's because I typed in border width instead of border width. Apologize for that. So just type in the R here. It's okay, sometimes we make mistakes. We all make mistakes, it's all good. All right, there we go. So here's what this is looking like. And right now, of course, none of the buttons do anything. But yeah, so that's what the play function did for us. Now we're gonna get started with the press function. So let's uncomment that. And the first thing we're gonna do here is we're gonna bring in the global variables that we created in part 1. So that's gonna be count and click. Let me show you guys those. So here they are, click equals true, count equals 0. So we're bringing them in. And in here, we're going to create an if statement. If click equals true, and it is equal true because we initialized it to true, we want to create a label widget. Let's call this the label photo. And let's call on the label class. Now in here, like I said, the first parameter is always going to be the name of our window. And we want this label to have a particular image in it, and that's going to be the image of the X photo. Remember, we stored it in a variable called X photo. Now let's go ahead and place this widget on the window. And this one's going to be row equals to R and column equals to C. So what this is doing is basically, let's say that the user clicks on button number 9. What's going to happen is we're going to call on the press function and we're going to send over the location of this button. In this case, it's 2, 2. So it's sending it over here. So if the user were to click on button number 9, then that particular button is going to turn into the X photo because we used the location of this button and we used it here. So we're placing this photo in place of that button. Now let's set click to false, and let's create a else statement, and we're just going to copy and paste this here. So Control C to copy and Control V to paste, and we're going to change the X photo to the O photo, and we're going to change false to true. And let me actually call on the play function so you can see what is going on here. All right, let me explain this code. All right, so let's say that the user clicks on button number 1. The first thing that's going to happen is it's going to call on the press function. The press function is then going to go to this if statement, and it's going to see if click equals to true, and it is equal to true because we initialized it to true. Next, it's going to create a label, and it's going to store the X photo inside of this label, and it's going to place that label in the grid in place of that button because that button is sending over its location through RC, and we're placing this label on that particular spot. So when I click this, that box is going to turn into the X image. Then we're going to set click to false. Now the next time we click on a button, it's going to call on the press function, and it's going to check here if click equals to true, and it's not because we set it to false. So it's going to go to this else, and sorry about that, and it's going to create a label with the O photo in it, and it's going to replace whatever button you clicked on with the O photo. So if I click on a button, it's going to give me that. Now we set click to true, so the next time that you click on it, it's going to go here, and it's just going to go back and forth, back and forth. So that's what this is doing here. Now, this isn't enough to tell us who won. If you look at this game here, you can tell that X won. But how do we tell the user that X won? That's where the text variable comes into play and this num here. So what we're going to do inside of this if statement is we're going to create another if statement, and we're going to say if num equals 1, then we want to set the text variable for that particular button. In this case, it would be button number 1 to X. We're going to have to do this for every one of our buttons. So go ahead and complete this for button 1 through 9. Now I'm just going to copy and paste this because I think it's just going to take way too long for me to type all this up in this video. And I'm just going to change the button number. And then for the last one, you could just use else. At this point, we also want to increase our count variable by 1 because by this point, one move has been made. This code here only accounts for X. We also have to account for O. So we're going to copy and paste this code here over to the else statement. So go all the way to the if here and copy that and paste it here. We're just going to change the X's to O's. Now let me explain a little bit more about the text variables for those of you that are still a little bit confused. Let's say that the user clicks on button number 9. The first thing that's going to happen is we're going to call on the press function. We're going to send over what button this is and the location of this button. So the press function is going to be called. It's going to check if click is equal to true, and it is because we initialized it to true. We're then going to create a label with the X photo in it, and we're going to place that photo in the location of that button. So basically it's going to turn that button into the X. And then it's going to go over to this if statement here, and it's going to check if num is equal to 1, and it's not because num is equal to 9 because this is button number 9. So it's going to go through all of these if statements, and when it finally gets to the last one, it's going to see that num is equal to 9, so it's going to set btn9, which is the text variable associated with that button, to X. Now what we're going to do here is we're going to call on the check when function. Now I actually didn't include that code here because we haven't written that function yet and it might give me an error. We're going to do that in part 3. But what that function is going to be doing is this is going to have every possible way that the user can win. Now let's say, let me actually show you an example here. So let's say that the user clicked on that button, that one, and this one. So the user clicked on button number 1, button number 5, and button number 9. So every time the user clicked on a button, it set the text variable associated with that button to X. Now check when is going to be comparing the text variables to see if they have an X in them. So one way to win a tic-tac-toe game is if you clicked on button number 1, button number 5, and button number 9. If all of those buttons have an X inside of them, then that means that you won. So that's how we're going to use the text variables to determine who wins the game. We're not using pictures, we're using strings that we're storing in the text variables. And if you're still a little bit confused, don't worry about it. In part 3, when we complete the check when function, you're going to see exactly how we're using the text variables to see who won the game. And that's going to be it for this video, guys. I'll see you guys in part 3.